The Galactic Council had never seen anything like this before. The Reichther were an ancient species, feared across the galaxy for their brutal strength and ruthless instincts. These apex predators had been responsible for the destruction of entire planets, their sharp claws and even sharper minds leaving no room for mercy for centuries. They had been both a symbol of terror and a force of nature, something the galaxy had learned to respect and avoid. But now, something entirely unexpected was unfolding before the Council. Captain Adrian Marks, a human explorer from Earth, had just arrived on the planet Ailer, a world on the outer fringes of the galaxy. This was not just any diplomatic mission. Marks had come to negotiate a peace between the Reichther and the fragile colonies they threatened. The Galactic Council had dispatched Marks with little hope, seeing the situation as hopeless. No one, they thought, could reason with a creature like the Reichther. Yet, here Marks was, a human who seemed determined to do the impossible. On Ailer, the planet was alive with the sounds of alien birds chirping and the distant hum of automated machinery working tirelessly to maintain the city. The atmosphere had a tinge of humidity, with lush jungles bordering the outer regions. But the people of Ailer lived in constant fear of the Reichther, who had made their home deep within the jungles. Mark stood in front of a large, transparent window in the Galactic Council's monitoring station, staring at the jungle beyond. His heart pounded in anticipation. For years, he had studied the Reichther, learning everything he could about their behavior, their biology, and their culture. But knowing something and facing it were two very different things. Today, he was going to make history. The Council had never seen this approach before. Most diplomats who attempted to negotiate with the Reichther did so with guns at the ready, believing that the only way to deal with these creatures was through force. Others had tried to bribe them with promises of territory and power, but the Reichther, indifferent to such things, had destroyed their peacekeepers without hesitation. And yet, Adrian Marks was different. He had no weapon, no plan for force. Instead, he believed that understanding was the key. "What are you doing, Marks?" a voice called behind him. It was Counselor Yara, one of the most respected figures in the Galactic Council. Her tone was harsh, filled with skepticism. "I'm going to meet them," Marks replied, his eyes still fixed on the jungle. The counselors had warned him countless times that the Reichther were not to be trusted. They were wild, dangerous, and had no place in the peaceful future they hoped to build for the galaxy. The thought of an unarmed human attempting to tame the Reichther was absurd. Yet, here Marks was, ready to take the first step. "No one has ever done what you're planning to do," Yara said, shaking her head. "You'll be dead within minutes." Marks turned and met her gaze, a calm resolve in his eyes. "Then I'll die trying, but I won't be the first." He knew the risks. He had seen the stories of those who had fallen before him. Mercenaries, diplomats, and soldiers who had gone to meet the Reichther, all coming back in pieces or not at all. But none of them had taken the time to understand the creatures, to observe their behavior like Marks had. His approach was not about brute force, it was about connection. The next morning, the atmosphere on Ailer was tense. Marks was dressed simply in his explorer's gear, sturdy boots, a utility vest with no visible weapons, and a communicator strapped to his wrist. The jungle loomed ahead, dark and thick with towering trees, their branches tangled together in a massive canopy. The air was thick with the scent of alien flora, heavy and warm. As Marks stepped out of the transport ship, the faint rustle of the jungle seemed to whisper to him. It was as if the very land itself was alive, watching him. His every step was careful, measured, as if he were walking on fragile ground. He wasn't here as a soldier or a conqueror. He was here as a student of the Reichther, hoping they might let him learn. It wasn't long before he saw his first sign of the Reichther. Large, clawed footprints marked the ground, leading into the heart of the jungle. Marks followed them with a calm determination, his eyes scanning every movement, every shift in the shadows. He had read the Reichther's body language, studied their movements in videos captured from afar. Now, he was going to see it firsthand. The silence of the jungle was unnerving. It was as if the world had paused, holding its breath. Then, from the corner of his eye, Marks saw it. a massive shape, hulking and dark, emerged from the underbrush. The Reichther stood at least 8 feet tall, its muscular frame covered in dark, leathery skin, with glowing eyes that burned like molten amber. Its long, curved horns sprouted from the top of its head, a sign of its power and status within the Reichther species. The creature's sharp claws scraped against the ground as it moved, and its massive tail whipped through the air with a deadly grace. Mark stood still, his heart racing but his body calm. He did not flinch or reach for any weapon. There was none to be drawn. Instead, he did what he had been practicing for years. He slowly extended his hand towards the creature, palm open, showing no threat, no aggression. The Reichther stopped in its tracks. It regarded Marks with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The air between them was thick with tension. Mark's mind raced, analyzing every twitch of the creature's muscles, every subtle shift in its posture. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he had to trust in his training. He had to trust in the Reichther's intelligence. For what felt like an eternity, the creature stared at him, its massive form towering over him. Then, slowly, cautiously, it began to move closer. Marks did not step back. He remained steady, breathing slowly, his eyes locked with the creature's. The Reichther's scent was heavy, musk and earth, as it leaned down to sniff the air out. And then, in an unexpected move, the Reichther extended its massive head forward and nudged Mark's hand. The movement was gentle, almost tender, and the weight of the creature's breath felt like a shock wave in the stillness of the jungle. Marks carefully lowered his hand to rest on the creature's horn. For a moment, he thought he could hear the hum of the creature's body, a sound of deep contentment. The Galactic Council, watching from the monitoring station far above, could hardly believe their eyes. The screen before them showed the unthinkable, a human petting the apex predator, the creature whose name had become synonymous with terror. They could only watch in stunned silence as Mark stood there, a human standing in peace with the very monster they had feared for generations. In that moment, something changed. The Reichther, once thought to be mindless beasts, seemed to show something that had never been seen before. Trust. Back at the Galactic Council's base, the counselors gathered around the large holographic display, their faces etched with disbelief. The silence was deafening. Counselor Yara, who had been the most vocal in her opposition to Mark's mission, now stood speechless. "This cannot be," she whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. "It's impossible." But there it was. The impossible had happened. The Reichther had allowed a human to approach it, to touch it, and perhaps most shockingly to tame it. What did this mean for the future of the galaxy? Could humans really do what no one else had done? It was the beginning of something no one had anticipated. The moment Captain Adrian Marks laid his hand on the Reichther's horn, something changed, not just in the creature, but in Marks himself. He felt a strange connection form, as though the beast understood his intentions, understood that he wasn't there to harm it. The tension in the air seemed to dissipate, and for the first time in years, Marks felt as if he were witnessing something far more profound than he had ever imagined. But as the Reichther pulled back, lifting its head high, Marks stood still unsure of how to move forward. "Good boy," he whispered, his voice calm, gentle. His words weren't directed at the creature in a condescending way. He spoke as though he were speaking to a wounded animal, a creature lost in fear. And in a way, that was true. The Reichther, despite its towering size and fearsome appearance, was no different from the frightened animals Marks had encountered on Earth. Creatures that needed trust to understand that they weren't alone, that they weren't the predators they were made out to be. The Reichther stood back, eyes glowing with an intelligence that Marks had never seen in any of the galaxy's other predatory species. The creature's movements were cautious but deliberate. As it circled Marks, observing him with a newfound interest, Marks remained still, resisting the urge to move too quickly. He didn't want to break the fragile bond they had just formed. From a distance, the Galactic Council observed, their faces frozen in disbelief. What they had thought to be a fool's errand, a dangerous mission bound to fail, was turning into something they had never anticipated. Marks was doing the unthinkable. He was gaining the trust of the Reichther, an apex predator whose reputation had struck fear into the hearts of countless races across the galaxy. On the monitor, Marx reached out once more, his hand extended in peace. The Reichther responded, lowering its massive head once again to accept the gesture. It was a moment that would change the future of the galaxy, and perhaps the fate of the Reichther species themselves. Back on the transport ship, Marx sat with his legs crossed, his mind racing as he observed the creature. The Reichther had not only accepted him, but seemed to seek his company, as if something inside it was reaching out for help, a cry for understanding. Marx wasn't sure what the future would hold, but he was sure of one thing: he couldn't turn back now. He had spent years studying the Reichther, poring over ancient texts and videos from other encounters, trying to understand their behavior. They were not mindless monsters. Their fearsome reputation had been built on misunderstandings, on conflict and war. They had been forced into survival mode, driven to violence as a result of the harsh conditions they had faced for centuries. Now, with the creature by his side, Marx began to see the Reichther not as a weapon, but as a living, breathing being, an animal that had been forced into a corner by a galaxy that didn't understand it. The Reichther's aggression was born out of its need to defend itself, to survive in a galaxy that saw it as nothing more than a tool for destruction. Marx spoke softly to the creature, offering it food he had brought along. The Reichther eyed the meat with curiosity before tentatively sniffing at it. The sight of the creature being so cautious, so unsure, was a stark contrast to the terrifying image that the galaxy had painted of it. Marx knew that if he could continue to gain its trust, they might be able to break the cycle of violence that had defined the Reichther's existence. For so long, after what felt like an eternity, the Reichther finally reached out and took the food from Marx's hand, its large claws delicately holding the portion. Marx watched intently, his eyes softening as he saw the creature eat slowly, as though savoring the act. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council continued to observe from their high-tech station. The members were scattered across the room, their eyes glued to the screen as they watched Marx and the Reichther interact. Counselor Yara, the woman who had opposed Marx's mission the most, was now shaking her head in disbelief. "This can't be happening," she muttered under her breath. "The Reichther are supposed to be wild animals. They don't form bonds with others." Counselor Drax, another influential member of the council, was equally stunned. He had been skeptical of Marx from the beginning, thinking of him as an overconfident human who would soon learn the harsh reality of dealing with a creature as dangerous as the Reichther. But as he watched the Reichther accept Marx's presence, his skepticism started to fade. Maybe, just maybe, the humans had something that the galaxy didn't. They had empathy, a gift that had been absent from many of the galactic races, who often relied on power and brute force to get their way. "This is extraordinary," Drax finally spoke. "Marx may be onto something here. If he can communicate with the Reichther, if he can show them another way, we might be able to end this endless cycle of violence." Yara didn't answer right away, her mind processing the unexpected turn of events. She had seen the Reichther as little more than a tool for war, a species to be controlled or wiped out. But what if Marx was right? What if the Reichther weren't just weapons? What if they could be something more? She turned to the monitor again, her eyes narrowing as she watched Marx and the Reichther interact. "If this works," she said slowly, "the balance of power in the galaxy could shift." As the hours passed, Marx spent more time with the Reichther, observing its behavior and continuing to build trust. Slowly, the creature began to let its guard down, allowing Marx to approach it even more closely. For the first time in its life, it seemed to feel safe, no longer perceiving the human as a threat, but as something different, a companion, perhaps, or a guide. Marx knew the risks. He had learned the hard way that every decision had consequences, especially when it came to being as powerful and unpredictable as the Reichther. But he also knew that this was an opportunity that couldn't be ignored. If the Reichther could be understood, if their intelligence and empathy could be recognized, it would change everything. The galaxy would no longer see them as mere monsters to be destroyed. They could become allies, partners in the galaxy's future, a future built on understanding rather than fear. with the sun setting behind them, casting long shadows over the jungle. Marx finally allowed himself a moment of peace. He had come here with a mission, a task that seemed impossible. But now, standing beside the Reichther, he felt as though the impossible was within reach. The journey had only just begun. As the days passed on the planet Aylar, Captain Adrian Marx found himself spending more and more time with the Reichther, each encounter revealing new layers to the creature that the galaxy had misunderstood for centuries. The initial shock of seeing a human interact peacefully with an apex predator was wearing off. But the question on everyone's mind was clear. Why was this happening? What had caused the Reichther, once thought to be mindless killers, to trust a human so completely? Marx, however, wasn't focused on answering the galaxy's questions just yet. He was still learning about the creature at his side. Each moment he spent with the Reichther felt like an unraveling mystery, one that had been hidden for so long, buried beneath the weight of fear and prejudice. One evening, after their usual interactions, Marx petting the creature, offering it food, and speaking softly to it, he sat on a large stone beside the Reichther, who had settled down next to him. The creature's dark eyes watched him quietly, a calmness in its gaze that Marx had never expected to see in such a powerful being. But as he sat there, he felt a sudden need to understand more. He needed to know why the Reichther had become so feared. His hand rested on the Reichther's horn again as he spoke softly to it, hoping for a response. "What happened to you?" he asked. "Why did you become so feared at first?" The creature did nothing but stare back at him, as though considering the question. Then, surprisingly, it let out a low, rumbling growl, not one of aggression, but of sadness. Marx frowned. The sound seemed to carry a weight that was not typical of the fearsome predator. He stood and turned toward the jungle, where the council's communication station was located in the distance. He had to learn more. There had to be something deeper to this creature than simply the image of mindless destruction the galaxy had painted. With a deep breath, Marx made a decision. He would seek out more answers. He had to. The next day, after receiving a message from the Galactic Council requesting an update, Marx went to the nearby library of ancient texts on Aylar. The library was home to centuries of knowledge, a treasure trove of history that was hidden away from the rest of the galaxy. It had been forgotten by most, only preserved by the people of Aylar in hopes that one day someone would come to seek it out. There, among the dusty tomes and ancient scrolls, Marx found what he was looking for. He had been told that the Reichther's history had once been recorded, but few records had survived the brutal conflicts that had ravaged their world. However, there was one manuscript, a journal kept by an ancient Reichther historian. Marx's eyes widened as he gently opened the book, his fingers tracing the worn pages. The writings told a different story from the one the galaxy knew. The Reichther had not always been monsters. Thousands of years ago, they had been guardians, protectors of their homeworld and the surrounding systems. The Reichther had once lived in peace with other species, their intelligence revered across the galaxy. They had been diplomats, scientists, and warriors, their skill in battle respected, but not feared. The journal spoke of their culture's deep connection to nature, their belief in balance, and their commitment to preserving life. But as the galaxy expanded and other species colonized nearby systems, the Reichther had become embroiled in conflict. Their peaceful ways were seen as weaknesses by those who sought power. Wars broke out, and the Reichther were forced into a position of defense. The journal described how the Reichther's once strong society had crumbled, the weight of war pushing them into an unrelenting cycle of violence. They had been forced to fight to survive. Their once advanced technology now used to wage war rather than preserve life. The once great protectors had been reduced to predators. Marx read further, realizing that the Reichther's aggression was not inherent but learned. The galaxy had misunderstood them. The creature sitting quietly beside him was the product of centuries of war and survival. The Reichther had fought for so long that they had forgotten the true purpose of their strength. A deep sadness settled over Marx as he closed the journal. The Reichther, it seemed, were victims of a greater conflict, one that had scarred them deeply. And yet, here he was, trying to break the cycle, trying to show them that peace was still possible. He had come to Aylar to negotiate, but now he realized that his mission was far bigger than a simple peace treaty. Back on the planet's surface, Marx returned to the Reichther. The creature was waiting for him by the edge of the jungle, as though it had been expecting him. It stood tall, its massive form casting a shadow over the clearing. Marx approached slowly, his thoughts still occupied with the journal's contents. He reached out, this time with a deeper understanding. The Reichther seemed to sense the change in him, as though it, too, had come to some realization. Marx placed a hand on the creature's horn once more. This time, his touch was less cautious, more confident, as if he had found a connection that transcended words. The creature, in turn, lowered its head in a sign of acceptance. Your past is not your future, Marx whispered. I know what you've been through, but I believe you can change. You can be the guardians you once were. I will help you. The Reichther growled softly, almost as if in agreement, and then it stood still, its eyes never leaving Marx. It was a moment of mutual understanding, a silent pact forged between the two. As Marx turned to leave, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He couldn't undo the damage done to the Reichther. He couldn't erase the centuries of pain and bloodshed, but he could help them find a new path. And that was enough. Back in the Galactic Council station, the members were watching Marx progress from afar. Counselor Yara stood before the screen, her arms folded as she watched the latest communication from Aylar. She had been skeptical of Marx from the beginning, thinking of him as nothing more than a naive human who didn't understand the realities of the galaxy. But now, as she watched him interact with the Reichther, she couldn't help but feel a shift in her perspective. What if he's right? Yara said aloud. Almost to herself, Counselor Drax, standing beside her, looked at her with raised eyebrows. Right about what? About the Reichther, she replied. What if they weren't always this way? What if they've just been misunderstood for centuries? Drax shook his head, still unconvinced. They're dangerous, Yara. We can't afford to ignore that. Yara's eyes remained fixed on the screen. Maybe. But I think there's more to them than just danger. I think Marx might be onto something.